Minister, good to see you. Thank you for being here on a big day.
Thank you, David.
You're not just one of Justin Trudeau's cabinet ministers, you're one of his very good friends. I mean, what has today been like for you?
Not easy. Justin and I have been best of friends since for about 40 years. This past fall, we started high school together and have been as close as it can be for that period. And for the last 10 years, professional colleagues. My loyalty to the Prime Minister is a personal one, but for purposes of the role that I play as a minister, one that is professional, and that I'm a minister in his cabinet, and I owe him my best advice. I spent probably more time in the last few months speaking to him about we don't talk that much about, as odd as it sounds, we don't talk a ton about politics. But I spent a lot of time in the last 6 months talking about a number of these issues, and this was not an easy decision for him to come to. There isn't a single discussion that I had with him that dealt with his legacy or his own personal ambition. Every conversation was about what any particular path and decision that he had to take would have on Canadians and on Canada. He's a guy that loves his country, loves Canadians, got into it for that reason, and is exiting it for precisely that reason. The decision today, as difficult as it was, and it doesn't come without remorse from the Prime Minister, and without high emotion, is one that was taken in the interest of Canadians, and indeed his decision to stay on through what can potentially be a tumultuous period where the Liberal Party chooses a new leader, but also with looming threats with the unemployment that can have in Canada from the Trump government. So This is a decision that the Prime Minister took in the interest of Canada and not in his own. He could certainly be doing other things as of tomorrow if he wanted to, probably more lucrative, but he decided that because he profoundly loves and wants to serve Canadians.
Not his reasons for staying on while the leadership process is happening, but his reason behind the announcement today. Do you think he made the right decision? Because I know when we spoke before the Christmas break, you wanted him to stay on, and we spoke after Chrystia Freeland did what she did. Do you think he made the right decision today?
David, a lot of what I may or may not have said to the Prime Minister personally is stuff that publicly has been perhaps misconstrued.
Well, there was this report you talked him out of resigning, right? You and Dominic LeBlanc.
I will take any advice I've given to the Prime Minister to the grave, as any minister should. But that said, I, as a friend, as a professional colleague, discussed a number of options with him, and it's something that he took the time over. And this last little while has been his birthday, Christmas, and his personal holidays with his family. No one should have to think about their future during those periods, but he's had to, and rightly so, because today's decision was the right one for the country. He thinks he still has gas in the tank. Indeed, I certainly think he does, and every instinct that got him to this show, to becoming the Prime Minister of Canada and to fight for Canadians is the instinct of a fighter. And sometimes fighters, they go a couple extra rounds, but no one will question their courage or their willingness to keep and stay in the fight.
Right, but he said he couldn't keep fighting the internal battles, right? It wasn't Pierre Poilievre that he said he didn't want to handle. It was the internal battles meant he couldn't focus on the larger battle being the choice in the next election. I mean, what do you make of that comment, and do you think he was ultimately just forced out by people in caucus?
Ultimately it's grinding. There's a number of decision points that congeal. There's no particular one moment that we can say was the determining factor. 2 years ago, I think he'll concede himself. He was asking questions. They were very personal decisions about his future, concerns about his own family. There are periods during the 6-month period that were perhaps more grave 2 years ago. But seeing a guy like Pierre Poilievre weaponize the Conservative Party was one that gave him the need and the willingness to fight for Canadians, and not see a guy like Pierre Poilievre become Prime Minister, and that invigorated him. He's also a smart guy. He knows he can't win battles on two fronts, and that's what he was facing, including, I think most importantly, the threat that we face from the United States with the potential job losses, shuttering of businesses if Mr. Trump does indeed impose tariffs. Our focus, his first matter of business coming out of the announcement today, a very emotional moment, was to jump into a very technical Canada-US Cabinet Committee meeting talking about the measures that we plan should we need to respond to the Trump government. So he cares profoundly about how government moves forward in the next few months that can be existential to many people's jobs in this country. So I give him that. But again, the decision that he took today does reflect the grind that was within the party. Can you go in? It raises an additional question, I think, for those of us that will remain on to fight the next election and to select the next leader. Is this the team that we want to present to Canadians? And do we deserve it? And that's something that doesn't go away with Justin Trudeau removing himself from the equation. This is a party that needs to screw its head on straight, that needs to stiffen up, and needs to rally behind a leader and present a number of policy options to fight a guy who was on display, Pierre Poilievre, today. Over the weekend, I called him a greasy walrus.
You did,
which is a little bit of locker room talk, but to a guy who's personally attacked the Prime Minister, it's mild stuff. But he was as greasy as hell today, classless, and that's what you see with Pierre Poilievre. He had one moment today to show a modicum of dignity, and he failed at that. And that's what we're constantly going to see with potentially a Pierre Poilievre government.
But just to focus on your own party for a second, because you said this is a party that needs to screw its head on straight. Is it the lack of an obvious urgency to fight Mr. Poilievre? Is it the infighting? Is it the lack of connection on the bread and butter issues that are driving politics right now? Because there have been so many of these things over the years that people have pointed to and say that there was a slowness to respond and a missing of the moment. Is that what you're talking about when you say the party's got to screw its head on straight?
Well, look, if you can fault the Prime Minister for focusing more on Canadians than on the internal dynamics of the party, I think that's probably a flaw.
But the issues that Canadians cared about, like inflation seemed to be slow on, cost of housing, cost of groceries. It was always explained in macro terms rather than focusing on the Canadian family and the Canadian
And that's fair, David. I think we need to do a better job resonating with Canadians. We have the job to govern, and these things aren't necessarily easy, but we need to be able to speak to Canadians, and we've been speaking to ourselves, and that's just the reality of it. I believe in the Liberal Party. I believe in its ability to work with Canadians to move our country forward. Indeed, the country is much better off than it was 10 years ago, thanks to policies that have been driven by Justin Trudeau. There are people alive today, David, that wouldn't be alive in some other G7 countries simply because of the measures we took during COVID. That is Justin Trudeau that drove that through. There are people that aren't living in poverty today because of that. And there are measures that we took with respect to the environment that wouldn't have been taken by a Conservative government. That's a legacy that needs to be reflected on and offered to Canadians as part of what we will do in the next election as a unified front. But right now, Justin Trudeau going away or not re-upping doesn't change the fact that the party needs to do a better job, be more united, frankly, keep things in-house a little more, and come up unified and ready to fight Pierre Poilievre with a new leader.
So how do you do that? Because part of screwing your head on straight is finding who's next, right? And, there's 8 or 10 names out there of various degrees. I don't know if you want to announce a candidacy here. You're welcome to do that.
There is not a chance I'm running, David. I can tell you that.
Okay, that was pretty unequivocal. So we'll cross you off the list. But, what now? Because, there were members of your caucus who have been pushing for the Prime Minister to go for months and months and months. Now he's gone. What do you need to do to reconnect with Canadians? Because it is not just the change in leadership that's going to do it, right? And there's not a lot of runway left. So how do you get from where you are today to being a viable contender to hold on to government or at least opposition in the next election?
I think the frankly question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we the horses that we need to go into battle with? And that includes those people who were quite vocal. I've been quite critical of some of them. I think a lot of people got things off their chest and were able to do things in private. The silent majority, you can ask yourself how it's feeling today about the
Of caucus or the country?
Of caucus, about how it's feeling. And certainly we're hearing from people around the country about their disappointment that the Prime Minister is leaving. We will have to choose and have a process that is robust within the party to select the new leader. We need to hear from all parts of the country. Caucus deciding who the next Prime Minister isn't fair to Liberal members in Saskatchewan that are voiceless currently. And I am part of a party that wants to respect Liberal voices in Saskatchewan, wants to respect Liberal voices in Alberta, despite the fact that I'm a Quebec Liberal MP, because that's the party I joined. And so having a process that is open to members, perhaps even rejuvenate parts of it, that's a big opportunity, and I think it's something we need to seize in relatively short order.
How do you do that, though, in the time frame that you have available, right? Because I know the executives with 75% vote can change the rules and shorten the timelines. But boy, you're coming back to Parliament on the 24th of March, and everybody says they're going to vote non-confidence. And with prorogation, that means a throne speech, which means a confidence vote on that. And if not that, then on interim supply. So there is a deadline you're looking at as a government, quite potentially. So what is the process to get that new person in place? And like, does it need to be done by end of February, like 1st of March? That's sort of a timeline, because going up to the 24th, you're cutting it close.
Yeah, look, lots of people have been pumping their chests or saying they're going to rip this up and do this and that, and yet they voted confidence in the past. That we owe it as a minority government to reach out to them and see if there is a path forward. It's unfathomable to me that we can't choose a leader of a Liberal Party in a 30 to 60 day period, whereas you can choose the Prime Minister of Canada or the leader of the country according to the Elections Act in a 30 to 45, 60 day period. So those rules that were not necessarily designed for a minority parliament under this type of pressure can be adapted, but we have to come to some consensus within the party to get that done. Some people will say it'll take 90, 100 days, but
I don't think you have 100 days.
Well, we don't, and otherwise, government essentially shuts down, and that wouldn't be right for the country. So, again, that's part of screwing our heads on right and getting the realization that we do have the capacity to choose a leader within a relatively short period of time, have a robust policy debate. As much as this has become personal in a lot of ways, we need to start talking about policies and how that resonates with Canadians.
You're not getting into this race. I don't know if you're ready to say who you want to be the next leader or someone you'd like to encourage to get into this race, but what are your thoughts on who is the right choice to replace your good friend Justin Trudeau?
Look, I will be speaking to, there's been a lot of speculation about who is and who isn't in. My expectation is that we will put forward someone that can take it to Pierre Poilievre, because I don't want that guy in power, and I will do everything I can to make sure that is the right person.
But there's the ability to go toe-to-toe with a very pugilistic leader of the opposition. But then there's, I guess, the sort of the embodiment of the values and focus of the party. And there's been some criticism, even from people inside your caucus who love your policy direction and are personally fond of the Prime Minister, that maybe gone too far to the progressive side of things. Maybe a pullback more to that sort of traditional brokerage centrist position that the Liberals have occupied throughout a lot of its history as a party. Where do you think the party needs to go, sort of between those two poles of where it is and where it's been?
It's a fair question. I've said this publicly about political parties generally, as we've tended recently in Canada and other countries to be defined by the zealots in our parties. Yeah. At the same time, being able to be a diverse group of people, but we can't pander to them, right? And so people that have issues that are near and dear to them, whatever it is, are ones that should feel safe to express them within the party and express that disagreement. I'll have to listen to the candidates, and I think members of the party who get the same number of votes that I do, we'll have to evaluate what those candidates bring to the table, and I'll be looking for someone that has a reasoned voice, and that is someone that I think can lead the country, regardless of whether we get seats in any particular part of that country, but speaks for all of Canada, for a progressive Canada that cares about everyone. Okay,
just one last question before I let you go. You're in cabinet, you're not going to run for the leadership. Do you think anybody in cabinet who seeks a leadership has to leave cabinet? There's no way you can stay in a cabinet and seek the top job. Is there it seems to create ethical and competitive challenges there?
Intuitively, I think they would have to leave cabinet. I don't know how we could get work done with someone that decided to stay. People will probably make it a political issue that they were leveraging their cabinet, but that shouldn't be the perception that is conveyed as we're trying to run this country through a difficult period. That decision isn't mine, David. It'll be one that the Prime Minister ultimately will have to make when he sees the slate of candidates. And I assume out of own personal ethics and actually management of your own time.
Time management
you have
alone,
to go. You have to talk to people. The conversations aren't necessarily 3 seconds. They can sometimes be 30 minutes to an hour. You have to sign people up. You can't get proxies to do that. You have to speak directly to people. It's one of the Prime Minister's qualities is he did speak. He spoke to the little guys and consistently spoke to people that you don't see on news shows or prominent people, but he rallied everyone into this party. It's the reason I got into the party. And I expect the next leader to do the same.
I would imagine you had a heads up before today. I'm just going to assume your smile tells me I'm correct. I know you're not going to tell me the details of that, and I know there's a cabinet meeting today, a full cabinet meeting at around 3 o'clock. I know you're not going to break your cabinet oath, but I just wonder if you can give me a sense of the reaction, the mood, and the message from the Prime Minister to the inner circle as you go into this sort of new phase.
It was very emotional. It went over the time that we were supposed to talk. I think, the Prime Minister did his announcement outside of Rideau Cottage, which is not a formal government setting.
No.
I think his care for government and the process of government impelled him to make sure that the people that had gone to war for him and were in his cabinet that he had the confidence in had the ability to talk to him, and he had the ability to talk to them. It's sad to see a guy like that go that cares so deeply about his country. I think everyone realizes it was the right decision. And so I think that reflected the time it took to get through that cabinet meeting. But there was lots of discussion about how we move on in the government, but a lot of thanks for his service to the country. I think all Canadians, I think most Canadians are showing an enormous amount of class today about what the Prime Minister has done. And that's much of the sentiment that was conveyed in cabinet.
Immigration Minister Marc Miller, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate coming in on a busy and a difficult day personally, but thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, David.